Alright, so as I was saying, if Gollum was the only person in the Fellowship left, so like, all these figures have gone out, they're somewhere on the map, Merry and Pippin are gone, their cards are gone, the only two cards that are left are these ones, the Gollum card and the Frodo and Sam card. If Gollum was the only person left in the game, then that would mean that right down here, the Shadow player would only be able to play, forgive me for the blurriness, would only be able to put one eyeball dice in the shadow box before his die roll. That means that once he would roll his die roll, like right here, he could roll it, and any eyeball dice that appear would still go into the shadow box. So for this instance, he would have 3, but the advantage is to basically attack the Fellowship while they have lots of characters in them, so you can kind of, individually corrupt characters on a 1-by-1 level. In other words, put dice in the shadow box so that you can roll lots of dice when the Fellowship moves, when it has lots of companions in the Fellowship, before it gets to a situation like Smeagol, or having Gollum in there, because with only one dice it becomes very hard to roll 6s and even harder to put lots of damage on the Fellowship. So you want to take care of things like that. So you want to keep an eye out for that. We'll go over it as the game starts, but one last thing to keep in mind is that there are some modifiers to rolling for the hunt. Alright, so let's pretend, for the sake of argument, or just so that you can see the cool example, that the Fellowship is in some different places on the board. Alright? So let's pretend that some way, somehow, the Fellowship is inside of a Free People stronghold that was taken over by the Shadow player. Alright? This could happen. It could. It probably would never happen in Rivendell. More likely in Moria or Minas Tirith. But the way that would happen is if there is an instance like that where there's a stronghold controlled by the Shadow player and the Fellowship is in there, then the Shadow player gets to re-roll just one of his missed die results. So if he got like a 6, a 4, and a 4 and a 1 like it shows here, and a 5, and he only can hit on 6s, and he can take one of his re-rolls, doesn't matter which, re-roll it, and hopefully get a 6. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, it's just probability of the dice. And then it would turn into a 6 and it would work like normal. Just like all the other times we've dealt with hunt stuff. There are 2 other times when the Shadow player gets re-rolls. Alright? So, if the Fellowship is, just chilling out over here, and let's say that they're in the Fords of Bruinen, and some way, somehow, Sauron's enemy forces got out and went into the Fords of Bruinen. Well, if that happened, then instead of the Shadow player, would get a reroll. So, just like before, they would reroll one of their missed dice to hopefully get a 6 or whatever they need to score successful hunts. Now, if a Nazgul was in that region, the Shadow player would get a reroll. So, if a Nazgul was just chilling out, chasing the Fellowship just like that, and there's no other enemy forces in there, then the Shadow player would get another reroll, or just a single reroll. However, the Shadow player gets to re-roll a dice for every one of those conditions that apply. So there's 3 conditions. 1, if there's a Nazgul in the area. 2, if there are enemy units in the area. And 3, if the Free People's player, or this Fellowship token, or marker, or figure, is inside a stronghold controlled by the Shadow player. If all those things apply, then the Shadow player gets 3 re-rolls on 3 missed dice. So that's how that would work, If in that weird, hopeless situation, the Fellowship was in Moria with enemy units and a Nazgul, then the Shadow player would be able to re-roll 3 missed dice if he was able to catch that. However, so that's one of the dangers of going through Moria instead of going through Fords of Bruinen, then the High Pass, and then Goblin's Gate, and then the Gladden Fields or the Old Ford. So that's how that would work. The Shadow player gets rerolls based on where the Fellowship is. However, if the Free People's player had control of Moria, which is rare, but not impossible, kind of like this, then it would be treated just like a Free People's stronghold. Alright? One last thing to talk about is declaring the Fellowship. And it'll become more apparent in the game, but let's just talk about it real quick. Say the Fellowship, so when you're moving along on the Fellowship track, up here, you don't want to go a terrible long ways down the Fellowship track with not a lot of corruption. Say you were on 5 and you started out here, right? Some way the Shadow player wasn't able to reveal you for the first 5 times you moved, and you had 5 movement, alright? So, on the start of your next turn, you would have, so like right before the Free People's player rolls the dice, the Free People's player would have the option to declare where the Fellowship is. It would happen just like this. If the Fellowship player had moved 5 times and was not revealed so that the blue marker was on 5 at the start of their turn, before they roll their dice, they could say, I reveal the Fellowship, or declare their position. It's not a reveal, it's a declare, excuse me. I declare the Fellowship's position, which means they can move 5 spots away from Rivendell to any spot on the map without fear of being revealed because they've already been able to move. So they declare. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that pops them in Lorien. Alright? So then when that happens, the Fellowship indicator counter thing would go down to 0. Nothing would happen to the counter marker even though it's on 2. Alright? We'll get to that. But when that happens, that's what declaring the Fellowship means, They declare the Fellowship declares their position, moves their little indicator down on the track, and they move their Fellowship counter, or the Fellowship figure on the board. You're not allowed to declare partial movement. Well, yeah, I guess you are, but you're not allowed to move if you're not allowed to start on 5 and then you say, okay, I declare within 2 spaces, and you move twice. No, it's move all of it down. You lose all of your movement, and then you move 5 spaces away from Rivendell, 5 regions away. However you want to get there, it doesn't matter. Alright? You can look online on Veldrin's site, I believe, or on Board Game Geek and find the shortest path or multiple paths or lots of advantages to taking multiple paths to get to Mordor. It doesn't matter. But that's basically how that works. Alright? So let's say that the Fellowship had 5 movement, 2 corruption, and they were in Rivendell. Before the Free People's player rolls their dice, they declare the position of the Fellowship. So they declare, and they knock all their movement from 5 down to 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The path was Fords of Bruinen, Holen, Moria, Dimril Dale, and then Lorien. Alright? Lorien is a stronghold. So here's some cool things about strongholds. Getting out of breath. Alright. So, whenever the Fellowship declares its position, and it declares its position in a stronghold or a city, we talked about what strongholds and cities are, then the Fellowship can heal 1 point of damage. So the Fellowship says, I declare, they move to Lorien, they're magically in a stronghold because it's 5 spaces away, and their corruption damage goes down by 1. That's a very beneficial thing. Sometimes it's good to wait 6 or 7 rounds in a stronghold while the Shadow player destroys your cities so you can make a blitz for Moria. Alright? So that can work with strongholds or cities that are controlled by the Free People's player. Doesn't matter if they're enemy strongholds or cities that were controlled by the Free People's that were controlled by the Shadow player. Once they're controlled by the Free People's player, they're fair game. I may be wrong on that, but I don't think I am. Alright? So just another rule to keep in mind. so like if by some chance, the fellowship was, on 4, whatever, and they're still in Rivendell, and they move the fellowship once, so this goes up, but they're revealed, alright? So if the fellowship is revealed, they go all the way down to 0, and they have to move 5 spaces from where they are. Well, the way that would work is they would move 5, just like normal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the rule with being revealed is once you are revealed and you're forced to reveal the fellowship's location, the fellowship is not allowed to have their movement end in a city or stronghold. So some things to take into mind. You don't want to try to get all the way up to 6 or 7 with the chance of being revealed, because you won't be able to end in a city. So to fix this, you'd have to hide the fellowship, move them again, and then you'd waste a whole nother turn trying to get back into Lorien if it's the end of your turn. Alright? So that's how that would work. We'll get into that. You'll see it more as the game goes on, but if the fellowship is revealed, they're not allowed to end their movement in a city or stronghold that is controlled by the Free People's player. They're allowed to end their movement in a stronghold controlled by the Shadow player, but not a Free People's player. Alright, just a few more things to keep in mind about the Fellowship. I lied a little bit before this. I said that the Fellowship player cannot end the Free People's player cannot end their movement in a region, in a stronghold or a city. Well, that's half right. They cannot end their movement in any Free People settlement, which would include cities, strongholds, fortifications, or, well, no, those aren't settlements. Anything with those little village circle things I talked about earlier. Alright? So one other thing is, we just talked about how the Fellowship was revealed, alright? Now, one of the other rules for moving the Fellowship is, if the Fellowship is revealed, and if their path is traced from their last known position to their current position, if part of that path was through an enemy stronghold, that was controlled by the enemy stronghold, that was controlled by the Shadow player, then the Free People's player would immediately have a hunt tile drawn on them. Alright? So without even rolling for the dice, the Shadow player would be able to draw a hunt tile immediately. So it's very dangerous to try to plan your moves through enemy strongholds. It's very dangerous, very tricky, and it's worth it if you don't get revealed, but if you do get revealed, it can hurt a lot. Like, for example, the action that just happened was the Fellowship was on 4, they moved their Fellowship, their blue token moved to 5. Some way, somehow, magically, the Shadow player drew out a level reveal icon on their hunt tile. So then the Fellowship is revealed. If they go through Moria to get a shortcut to the Lorien, then a hunt tile is immediately drawn. If because of the fact that they're revealed, they cannot end their movement in Lorien. So, you've got to go. And the other thing is that if you decided to go, Fords of Bruin, High Pass, Goblin's Gate, Old Ford, Gladden Fields, you could do that, but you'd still be 2 steps further away from Lorien than had you not done that. Alright? So it's a lot of give and take, it's a lot of personal input. How do you think you can win? How do you think you can manage it? Alright? So one of the last things we're going to talk about is what is meant by being in the Fellowship and out of the Fellowship. Alright? So we talked about earlier how the Fellowship marker right here indicates who is in the Fellowship and who's out. Well, we're going to pretend that the game is new. Alright? They're over there. And we're going to have all the companions back in the Fellowship box. Alright? So all these guys and their little circle counters are back in the box. Alright, so while the members of the Fellowship are inside the Fellowship box, their abilities on their cards that are listed below their leader abilities do not work. Alright? So, for example, one cool ability is some of the companions have the ability to help their nation move down the political track faster. For example, Legolas has the ability to do that for the elves. but he cannot use his ability until he is outside the fellowship. Alright? So the way to separate companions from the fellowship is you take one of your dice. It could be a Will of the West die. It could be a character die. Can't be anything else. Will of the West because it's wild. So you'd use a character die result, and you would separate any number of companions that you want from the fellowship. So the way you do this, like say you wanted to do a Mordor Blitz, alright? You separate, you don't want to do a Mordor Blitz. You can separate all or any or one of them. Let's say you separate, Legolas, Gimli, and Strider. Alright? You pull them out along with their respective tokens. Alright, so you'd find their tokens, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir, and Strider. So that all that's left in there is Gandalf and the two hobbits. You'd pull them out because they're not going to be used anymore. And all those players would immediately go to Rivendell. Alright? Alright, so all the characters that you decided to remove from the Fellowship are then moved to the Rivendell space, alright? And all those characters are allowed to move a number of spaces equal to the position of the Fellowship plus their own movement. So for example, if we pretend for a little bit that the Fellowship was at 2 on the Fellowship track, then that means that Strider could move 5 away, alright? Strider could move 5 because he's a level 3. And other players could move equal to a number of regions equal to their level plus the Fellowship's current position on the Fellowship track. Alright? If you wanted to, you could move them all as a group. Right? So like, Strider could take them all and make them run real fast, and he could take them 5 spaces away. But if you move them as a group, you cannot separate them during their movement. You'd have to wait till later. Alright? We'll get into that a little bit. Well, you'll see that a little bit later, but I believe we are ready to start. I think we've covered just about everything. Just a reminder, those Elven Ring tokens we talked about a while ago, you can see how valuable they are now in that they let you change the die results for any one Free People's die result. Once the Free People's player uses an Elven Ring, the Elven Ring will then go to the Shadow player. So it's a give and take, and the Shadow player will then be able to use that ring, alright? The same way that the Free People's player did. So with that, I think we're ready to start. Alright, before we start the game, let's take a look at everything we've gone over. We've gone over how the armies attack each other and how they can defend, and how strongholds work. We've gone over how the Fellowship of the Ring can work, how they can absorb and take corruption. We've gone over how the Fellowship moves. We've gone over how you separate companions from the Fellowship. We've gone over some dice movement. We've gone over the shadow box. We've gone over the stronghold boxes. We've gone over the Elven Rings. We've gone over the victory conditions. We've talked about how the Free People's player needs to either destroy the ring or get 4 points from taking over 2 strongholds or 4 enemy cities, or some way somehow getting 4 points. We've talked about how the Shadow player wins by corrupting the ring bearers to 12 corruption, or by taking over 10 cities, or by taking over 10 points worth of cities and strongholds. That's basically the game. We've talked about the political track, how we have to get people to be at war, the last square at the very, very bottom. We want all of the Free People's player wants all their nations to be at war. The Shadow player doesn't want that as much because they're ripped roaring ready to go already. Alright, we'll be starting the game in just a bit. Just keep those things in mind. The Shadow player is trying to corrupt the Fellowship to no end, or gain control of 10 points worth of cities and strongholds. The Free People's player is trying to get the ring to Mount Doom. Very rarely, I've only really ever been able to do it twice, and that was kind of with a little bit of easy settings, have I ever been able to get military victories. It's very hard to win a military victory with the Free People's Player. Possible, but very hard. Alright, we'll be starting in just a second. Keep those things in mind, and here we go.